Warning, censorship.
The mainstream media did not know who I was, being the undocumented foreigner in this land. And they were speaking a little candidly. Would you like to hear what they said?
What can I say? I keep thinking I can't be surprised by what happens in this country, and then we get another big surprise. I followed this case. I was here at the last hearing in the Old Bailey when Tommy gave a submission to the judge where it was obvious that no offence had been committed.
They have a bunch of anonymous sources in policing and banking saying that the fact that the killer was able to withdraw $475,000 in cash from Brink's Banking, which does not at all serve consumers directly, is typical of how the RCMP would pay informants or agents.
Andrew Lawton is a podcaster, writer, and political commentator with True North. You can find him on Twitter at Andrew Lawton, on andrewlawton.ca, and of course, tnc.news. Now, Andrew, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hey, good to be with you, Andrew. I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. Now, I first think I saw you for the first time on your own podcast, and as I suspected, all Andrews have great ideas. Why don't you tell the people who don't know how you first got involved at True North? I know you have a strong broadcasting and writing background. Tell everybody what got you involved in politics in the first place and how you got to be with True North.
Oh, that's a big, long question, but I'll try to give the interesting summation of it all. I was working for a mainstream media company, actually, doing a talk radio show for several years. And after I left that, I took a little bit of a brief foray into politics, and it didn't end particularly well as I lost. But looking back on it, I'm actually fairly grateful for that in many ways. And I wanted to do something that was a lot more fun and really giving me a lot more of an ability to talk about the issues that I care about and follow the stories that I wanted. So I kind of decided to chart a path in independent media. And I was very grateful that my friend Candace Malcolm had started at the time this small upstart movement called True North. And she had asked if I wanted to do something previously, and it didn't really work out at the time. But this time around, I thought it would actually be a lot of fun. And it was a growing organization. So for starters, it wasn't something that is like it is now with a bigger team and with full-length shows. So the role has morphed, but I wanted to get to a return to broadcasting. And I'd actually got my start in podcasting before I worked for a radio station. So it's been good to get back to it.
For sure, and let's jump right into this stuff here that's been going on. Canadian politics is hot right now. We know it isn't always, but the Canadian Conservative Party is all over the map right now. They're all over the news, so to speak. They seem to be in damage control weekly, if not daily. And for the past year, it's sort of been, giving people the boot, being on the defensive really quickly. The recent examples, of course, are Roman Baber and now Derek Sloan. Do you think, in general, it's a good move for the Conservative Party to be on such a defensive right now?
No, and it never is. And I'd say one of the biggest failings of conservative parties in Canada, and even more broadly, you can see this around the world, is not setting out their own game and their own rules on their own field. It is rather playing the left's game on the left's field by the left's rules. And it's never going to work out particularly well. We saw this with Andrew Scheer, where instead of sticking to the principles he had long held throughout most of his time in politics, he was very equivocal in a lot of things when he was asked about them, instead of just planting his feet and saying, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for, take it or leave it. And I think there's a big lesson that the right needs to take from this, which is that you're always going to be called far right. You're always going to be called racist, homophobic, this and that. So trying to bend yourself into knots to make it so that you aren't called those things isn't actually going to work. Now, obviously, no one should be any of those things, but the point is that the accusation is always going to be there. One of the things before Derek Sloan was kicked out of the Conservative caucus that really jumped out at me was Erin O'Toole last week putting out this long statement disavowing the far right. Now, what does the far right mean? I know what the left thinks it means. The left thinks that you're far right and I'm far right and Erin O'Toole is far right. The left, I think, thinks Michael Chong is far right. But when someone in Erin O'Toole's spot says, you know what, we have no place for the far right, all he's really doing is talking about his movement and his party in the terms of the left. And it doesn't actually advance anything. It doesn't advance anywhere. One thing that Stephen Harper did very well is he actually wanted to push the line down the road. He didn't want to just reclaim lost ground. He wanted to gain ground. And there were a lot of areas where I think people could say he could have done more and should have done more. But conservatives since then have only been in catch-up and defense mode.
It's very confusing to me where the line, and you mentioned setting their own rules. Of course, I do agree with you there. I'm wondering where the line actually is for somebody like OToole, because in the case of Derek Sloan, what you have is a guy who's known as not a good guy, a white supremacist. I don't know much about him. I didn't hear about him until somebody took a picture with him at the Adamson barbecue fiasco. So you've got a guy donating $100-something under a name that most people probably wouldn't be familiar with right off the top of their head. It's not a significant amount, and I would say it was probably very hasty of the Conservative Party to immediately say, you know, we can't have any of this. This is racism. This person donating. Am I going crazy here? What is the line? Where is the line where we can draw, where we actually defend, if you're Aaron O'Toole, defend people in our party?
Look, I've been involved in politics for a while, and this is from the get-go something that reeks of they wanted to get him out, and this was the first available quote-unquote excuse they could use. You don't turf someone for this when you could easily defend this in the way that Derek Sloan has, by saying, first off, we had 13,000 donors. I wasn't looking at every single one of them. Secondly, I don't know this guy's name. Thirdly, he wasn't even using his real name, and so on and so forth. So this is the situation where the Conservatives acted so quickly because they clearly wanted him out, and this was the first thing they saw that they could kind of use as a cudgel to achieve that. And then you have to ask the question of why. Because if you're someone who has been anti-Derek Sloan, and a lot of criticism about Derek Sloan has been put towards Aaron O'Toole, if you're one of those people, you're not satisfied by this because Aaron O'Toole still refused to kick Derek Sloan out on this policy or that policy or this statement or that tweet. So you don't actually, again, win anything. You don't win any of your critics over by doing this.
That's a good point. And what I want to point out now is a few people, not many, but a few people have been asking myself and to a larger extent Rebel News, if you will, how come you guys are going after this? How come you're not focusing more on what Trudeau is or is not doing? And to that I say, Trudeau isn't doing anything right now. He's sitting back. I mean, his last public statement was him, among other things, of course, saying that he doesn't want a vaccine passport. Whereas the last few weeks we have O'Toole saying, this is racist, we condemn the far right, don't question political Islam. What do you think Trudeau, his plan is? What do you think he's gaining by sitting back and watching? Is it just let them burn their own house to the ground?
I think in a lot of cases, yes. I mean, right now, the opposition, whose job it is to oppose, isn't really able to oppose the Liberals because the opposition's too busy opposing itself. So for Justin Trudeau, why would you get in right now? When the attention is on what looks like a Conservative implosion, you just sit back and let it unfold.
Yeah, and when we speak about people who were no longer in the party, who've been ousted, I think of the Carahalioses who started their own party, the New Blue Party. And then, of course, I think of the PPC. Now, in your personal opinion, do you think any of these people should be, the Babers, the Sloans, do you think any of these people should be starting their own parties? Should they be joining the New Blue or PPC? What do you think is the next move for them?
Well, I mean, the problem with starting new parties is that you see fracturing take place. And I think a great example of this is right now at the federal level. You've had the Libertarian Party, which is a longtime party that's been in Canada. You have the PPC, which is formed. If someone forms a new party on top of that, it's going to completely make it so that everyone just looks like they're running a vanity project. Provincially, you have the Freedom Party, you've got the Libertarian, and now you've got Jim and Belinda Carahalios with the New Blue Party. If someone else were to form a new provincial party, again, it would look like each person has their own vanity project. My concern is less with parties and more with a movement. I mean, if you believe that politicians are cowards, or you believe that politicians are mushy, or you believe whatever, the answer to that is to make a climate that either gives politicians the ability to stand up for something, or to at least create a climate that elects politicians that aren't like that. Now, I think there are good people that believe the right things and advocate for the right things in office in Ontario and at the federal level. But the whole point is that we have a climate now that makes it very easy for people to get ousted, for people to get canceled, as you've talked about in the past and as I've covered on my show extensively. So, yes, I mean, new parties might solve a short-term need, but creating a new party doesn't deal with the underlying cause of that problem, which is that mainstream parties are apparently not actually open to the big tent of opinions that's always been taken for granted.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. If putting out a 2-page document or having a random person donate to you is the marker for getting kicked out of a caucus or a party, I'd say that's pretty low. And as you said, they probably didn't want them there in the first place. And even if they're making good points, apparently we can't have that in the modern Conservative Party. And that's concerning to me because, like you said, what's going to happen in a snap election that happens? Liberals are going to gain a little bit more, probably. Conservatives are going to get a little bit less. NDP will continue to lose. But I don't know how this progresses anyone forward in the type of ideas that someone like you or I or somebody who's a viewer of ours might prefer to go. And if they start joining or creating new parties, you're right, it's going to fracture a lot more. It's going to be way more hard. It's going to be a lot harder to get proper messaging. So in my personal opinion, I'm thinking that maybe they should try to start a coalition in the PPC or in one of these existing parties and really hammer home the messaging. But I do recognize that on the other side, they're going to say Maxime Bernier and Derek Sloan on the same team. This is just a racist party. So it's hard to win in a political climate like this. You mentioned cancel culture. A lot of people are saying that's what OToole is doing. He's taking part in this. It's not a very conservative thing to do. Has anyone ever tried to cancel you, Andrew Lawton? Have you experienced this personally?
Oh, like 7 times by lunch usually on most days, I think. No, I've been through it. Look, I ran for office, and when you're running for office, everyone throws everything they've got at you. And I'm someone who came of age in an era where social media was a thing. So I had inopportune tweets and Facebook posts that, of course, have been screenshotted and reposted years after they were deleted. I mean, this is a common occurrence in politics right now, and in media, and in many other sectors. And to the point that I made on the last question about how we need to create a culture here, politics is downstream of culture. That's the axiom that was made famous by Andrew Breitbart, and it's truer than ever now, which means that the answer is not going to come through just, electing this person or that person. We have to start winning over hearts and minds in culture, and cancel culture is a huge example of this, because if we don't resist the cancellation of others in our own lives, we're only going to fuel a culture that will eventually come for most of us.
Yeah, and to your point there, I was going to ask you next of combining the culture and the politics to where it's more of a, I don't want to say mainstream because that sounds like one thing, but where it's top of mind, it's not hard for people to talk about certain political issues or not specifically shun anything that they may not have heard of aside immediately when they hear them. So my question was going to be, what's your advice for younger conservatives in Canada who aren't sure where to turn? They turn on their Snapchat stories or their Instagram stories and see what's trending, and it's all probably completely opposite to what they see as the correct answer to things. What's your advice to a young conservative who has everything thrown at them, and if they were to come out with their own opinions and speak what their mind, let's say in front of a classroom of their peers, they would get completely canceled as much as you can as a teenager maybe? What's your advice to them when it looks like maybe from their own point of view that there's nowhere to turn to hear people that they agree with?
That's a really, really good question. And I mean, the one thing I will say is that you're going to have a tough few years. That's my advice to anyone in that. I mean, it's not going to be easy. If you have 2 options, one is to speak out. You're going to risk being pilloried and mocked and potentially reprimanded for that. And if you keep quiet, you're also dealing with another set of problems, which is not being able to be yourself and talk about these things. So I think that accept that neither one is perfect. And then the question is, which do you think is better in the long run? And if you take a stand for something, I'm a firm believer in the fact that you can never look back on that and regret it if you've taken a stand. Now, that doesn't always mean picking fights. I think as a culture, what we have to get better at doing is bringing back the art of disagreement. This used to be something that anyone could do, that I could say something that I think, you could say something you think, we disagree, we have at it, no one punches each other, and that's that. And, maybe we end on a note where we agree with each other, maybe we don't. Right now, no one has that. No one wants to do that. And I'd say this is mostly coming from the left, as we well know, where they just don't want to have my side and your side. They want only one side to be on the table. And that's the problem we see in politics. And to bring it back to politicians and partisan politics, we can't accept that. We can't eat at the table that the left has set for us.
Now, what's your opinion on the culture and climate in university and colleges? I went to broadcasting school at Humber College, for anyone who's interested. And even there, in a broadcasting setting, I was exposed to new music, new people's opinions, people who are from different parts of the country who believe different things. A dairy farmer, shout out to dairy farmer Alex that I haven't spoken to in 10 years. What do you think is the solution now to reversing course, which appears to be almost more of it's like they're degressing into more of like a childlike behavior in university and campuses. We've seen it all, of course, with Jordan Peterson, if you want to go back a few years. How do we reverse course on that? Is it a matter of mandating politics from professors? Is it cutting out some courses? Is it simply trying to encourage more school groups? There's so many in the United States. Young America for Freedom, Turning Point USA. What's the reversal of that, and how do we accomplish that?
I do think those sorts of groups are valuable because they make you feel like you're not as much of an outcast as you might feel if you pipe up in your gender studies class about your belief on whatever. But I would also caution against siloing, which I think is only furthering that inability for people to have respectful disagreement if everyone has their own little bubble and they don't go outside of it. I think expose yourself to new experiences. Maybe it's new music. Maybe it's a different conversation. I would say don't actually treat the left the way the left treats the right. Because we tend to, I think, as conservatives, close down when we hear people talking about, these little buzzwords that we know are associated with left-wing ideology, where I'd say don't actually be afraid of engaging. Because some people, and again, it may be a minority, but some people, if you catch them as an individual, not in a group, as an individual, you can have that dialogue. The problem is that group speak is a product of group think. And you're never going to get anywhere if you've got the conservative group talking to the liberal group. But one conservative talking to one liberal, I have hope it's possible to have a dialogue in some cases.
My colleague Dave says 30 minutes alone with that person and I can change their mind. Andrew Lawton, we're going to say goodbye to our YouTube audience and move behind the paywall. We're going to talk about coronavirus, tech censorship, and fact checkers. And if you want to see the rest of this conversation, go to rebelnewsplus.com.
That's good. I was saving my best material for this part.
Thank you for watching Andrew Says. If you want to see the full uncut version, go to rebelnewsplus.com and sign up today so you can see the entire episode where we talk about topics we can't show you on YouTube. They'll ban us.